The Columbus first landfall mystery for many years has continued to remain unsolved. This past weekend, 4 News traveled with Tim Ainley, a resident of Providence, Cialis, to meet up with Josiah Marvel, a close friend and scholar who resides for part of the year on the island of Salt Key. They are both searching for the truth about the 1492 first contact. For over 20 years, Josiah has been translating the Diarios of Columbus. And according to his translations, Columbus didn't make first landfall on the islands of Watlinks and Salvador in the Bahamas, but did, in fact, make first contact on the island of Grand Turk.
I've known Cy for a very long time, and I've been very interested in the Columbus landfall conundrum for a very long time, since I first sailed here through the Bahamas 30 years ago. And I was concerned that the tremendous amount of work that Cy has done on this historical question should not be lost. And I very much wanted to bring it back into the public eye. And on a lovely sail from Salt Key down to Provo last summer, I proposed this expedition to him to sail in the wake of Christopher Columbus after his landfall in Grand Turk. And I said, Cy, if I put this together, will you come? And he said, yes, I will. And I've rather forced his hand, because I have put the expedition together, and Cy is here to join us on Sunday to follow Columbus through the southern Bahamas.
Tim is realizing a dream of mine that started more than 30 years ago. I had closed my books because my patron, Robert Power, with whom I had worked very, very closely on the Columbus landfall, died unexpectedly in 1991. And there was a lot of bad feeling about Columbus 20 years ago, but now a new generation has grown up. And I think that the world may be a little bit more mature and can appreciate Columbus for the extreme elegance of daring that he exhibited in sailing across the ocean and finding out what was on the other side. In 1987, Oliver Dunn, who was a distinguished librarian in America, published a translation of the entire log of Columbus. But because that year the political powers all around the Caribbean had agreed that for convenience they would treat San Salvador as the landing place of Columbus, the translation that Oliver Dunn made was inclined to favor that landfall, and I don't think was really true to the Spanish of the logbook of Columbus. So I spent at least 10 years translating very, very carefully with the knowledge of the Spanish, also of Portuguese, and specifically of Latin, which Columbus knew, as anybody with any education knew at that time, to find out precisely what he meant. Now, the purpose of this trip for me will be to verify that my translation of Columbus's logbook is in fact accurate. Of course, I will admit it if I'm wrong, but I'm very inclined to think, after discussing maritime terms with Captain Tim here, that I've got it right. But it requires the voyage to prove it, and that's why I'm sailing with you.
I just wanted to add, Cy, that what Christopher Columbus did 500 years ago is really on a par with the Americans landing a man on the moon.
Armstrong on the moon. And I should say there that nobody who watches this program will be able to say, I'll bet, where Armstrong landed on the moon. And we have the same problem with where Columbus landed on the far side of the ocean. And part of our trip is to find out precisely where that is.
This is a puzzle that has challenged historians for hundreds of years. And we believe that we have enough evidence to set the record straight and prove to the world once and for all that Columbus landed in Grand Turk. Whether he was good or bad, this is irrelevant to our expedition. Would you agree with that, Si?
I should add to that we're doing this not by assertion, but we're doing this by an accumulation of evidence over a long period of time and subjecting the theory to an experiment.
To the test of trial.
The test of all knowledge is experiment.
Well, and as your captain, I am challenging your theories to the test of reality. And what we are going to attempt to do is sail in real time at real speeds into the actual anchorages that you propose.
Yes.
In order to prove that it could be done, that your theories are in fact viable. And if we are successful in sailing this 2-week course through the southern Bahamas to Ragged Island, from where everybody agrees Columbus left for Cuba, that in itself adds considerable evidence to the your Columbus landfall theory. Am I correct?
I'm confident that the voyage will do exactly that, because in pursuing my translation of the logbook, I have relied heavily upon your knowledge as a seaman.
Well, and I've had to stop you on occasion and say, no, he would not have anchored there. And I remember you saying, why not?
That's part of relying on your knowledge. I don't mind being told I'm wrong, as long as whoever's doing it is right.
Well, I do think it is this meeting of the historian and the sea captain.
Yeah, theory and practicality to...
which is why this is going to be such an interesting expedition. One of the things that Si and I have discussed at great length is the anchorages, the harbors into which Columbus could have and might have sailed and anchored. And one of the things as a mariner that I feel is irrefutable is that A, he could not sail any closer than 70 degrees to the wind. Today we have engines and we turn on our engines and motor wherever we want to go. I'm a sailor and have been all my life, and I know that there are some places you just won't sail because you know you won't be able to sail back out of them. That's number one. Number two is that in 1492, chain had not been invented. And as a result,
well, it had been invented, but they couldn't put force on it because the links broke. Right.
I see. It wasn't reliable, and so they would have been anchoring with rope roads.
Exactly.
So the anchor would have been attached to the boat by rope. Well, if you drop an anchor into coral or coral rock, line will chafe through very quickly. It's happened to me. It takes half an hour, and you're gone.
And you lose your anchor.
You lose your anchor and you lose your boat if you're not
right,
on it.
Right.
So it is paramount that you anchor in sand if you have a rope line. And so while we have to choose anchorages that we can sail into and out of, given the prevailing winds from the east, we also have to choose anchorages with clear sandy bottoms that we can anchor in without any risk of losing our anchors to chafe on the rocks.
If I could add a third criterion to that, I think you want to be on a protected shore, so that the wind will blow you offshore if your anchor parts.
Absolutely.
I think that's a third criterion.
Absolutely.
What's interesting about this is that any other landfall theory requires at least one anchorage on a weather shore where the wind will blow you onto the shore and a rocky bottom. And I just don't see Columbus taking that risk.
Columbus, if I've understood correctly, Si, was a superb mariner. He's widely recognized as having been...
Admiral Samuel Morrison said, you can say a lot of things about Columbus. He, by our standards, he did things that were wrong, but you cannot criticize his seamanship.
And as a seaman myself, not of Columbus's stature, I would never anchor off a windward shore.
A weather shore.
A weather shore. No. You just don't do it.
I think that's very important, and I think that those who live in libraries and try to plot Columbus's route are completely ignorant of this because they're not sailors.
That's the basis of our
well, of our rapport on this. Columbus was a charmer. He was an Italian man, and he knew how to paint exciting pictures for the edification and to charm the queen. And his descriptions of the islands are absolutely lyrical. He even describes the fish on the reef, you know, as if he were a master Italian painter. And the island that he loved the best was the fourth island, which he named after the queen, Isabella. And he said when he was anchored off it at a place which he called Cabo Hermoso, which means the beautiful cape, he said the perfume that the wind breathed from the trees, the flowering trees on the island, filled him with rapture. The night of the 11th of October, according to Columbus's calendar, the moon did not rise until about midnight, so it was pitch dark. And from the flagship, Columbus believed that he saw a light which looked like a candle rising and being lifted up. One of the royal visitors from the capital was with him, and he saw it. Somebody else didn't see it. But what's really interesting is that later testimony showed that it was seen from the Caravel Pinta as well. Tim and I have had a discussion that's lasted 20 years about the cause of the light. I propose that it was bioluminescent, you know, an agitation of monocellular organisms on the Mouchoir Carré, whose rocks pierce the surface and would be in the right position to see it. And I don't quite know how that arrived at being seen as a candle rising and being lifted up. Tim suggested, well, go ahead and tell me what you suggested.
Well, I have seen on several occasions while on Beluga, my sailboat, at anchor in the Caicos Islands, the lightning over the Dominican Republic, which is approximately 100 miles south of us. And it's not lightning like you see at sea. I've been at sea all my life and I've seen a great deal of lightning. I didn't know what this was when I first saw it. I thought it looked like a flickering candle rising out of the sea. And in fact, it's the shape of a candle flame. And it's so far away you can't identify it as lightning. And I have also seen it up close and personal sailing into Puerto Plata on the north shore of the Dominican Republic. Behind which are 2,000-foot mountains and massive electrical storms in the late afternoon and early evening. Terrifying electrical storms. And it's not just a bolt of lightning here and a bolt of lightning there. It's clouds of lightning going in every direction.
But seen at a distance of 100 miles would give the impression of a point source.
Yes, and quite a small point source.
That's very interesting. This has moral connotations because when Columbus returned to Spain, he was awarded by the Spanish crown a prize of an annuity of 10,000 maravedis, which would be close to $10,000 today. And people thought that this was very unjust. But if it is true that what he saw was lightning over the Dominican Republic, then he did see evidence of the first land, and he was an honest man to have received the prize.
The other very interesting thing about the flickering candle, having possibly been lightning over the Dominican Republic, is that it could not be seen from any farther north than Grand Turk. So
good point.
All of the other landfalls, which are farther north in the Bahamas,
fail to meet that criteria.
Which brings me to the work that you did with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in
Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution.
Forgive me, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, indicating that 500 years ago, magnetic deviation was considerably greater than it is today.
Yes.
And that in fact Columbus's compasses were taking him farther south than most historians have thought until
all the charts from that period, as a matter of fact, most of them solved the problem of magnetic variation by having two equators, at least 4 degrees apart. So you had a western equator and you had an eastern equator, which makes navigation a bit hazardous.
Yes, a bit preposterous, really.
Right, exactly.
And you were instrumental in showing...
Well, no, I found 6 measurements of magnetic variation within 50 years of contact 1492, which I presented to the Woods Hole Institution. They programmed their computer to sail Columbus's ships across the sea, and they arrived at a conclusion that if this was indeed the case, and I provided them evidence that it was, then it rules out the possibility of a landfall and a disembarkment in the central Bahamas.
Very quickly, what was that magnetic deviation?
1 point, 11¼ degrees.
11¼ degrees.
To the
And on
west.
this chart that we have before us here, which is dated 1830, the variation is 7 degrees.
Yep. Well, it changes. It changes all the time,
It
and
does.
you cannot predict it, and you cannot you cannot work it backwards in time. It's completely random. It is affected by convection currents within the liquid interior of the Earth, and it is also affected by alphin waves that come through the solar wind, which bring about magnetic storms on the Earth, which is a dangerous thing in this electronic age.
So we know much more about magnetic variation today than
Columbus did. That's
or than
certain.
we did 100 years ago.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's now known that 700,000 years ago, the polarity of the magnetism of the Earth reversed. And this is probably due to the sun's having ejected a vast plasma cloud of very, very high energy, which caused the magnetic field of the Earth to reverse. If you have a small magnet like this, and you bring a very large magnet near to it, it'll reverse the field of the small magnet.
So just to recap, you were able to discover that Columbus was sailing farther south than most people thought he was,
Yes,
which brings him to Grand Turk.
no question about it.
So, Cy, why don't we go up to the highest point of Salt Key now and see if we can see Pins on Key and possibly South Caicos.
It's a clear day, and we might see as far as South Caicos.
Well, we may in fact be able to see both the Landfall Island and Grand Turk and South Caicos.
If we're lucky.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
And we shall be well protected by the cannon.
Good, glad to hear that. There are a lot of variables, but by doing this expedition, we are going to get a lot closer to the truth.